The core value that at the heart of Judaism is a vision that we should and can and are entitled through our national homeland and our history and our connection that we've never broken, and to have a home, a Jewish state in the Jewish land, in the land of Israel, where we can express ourselves as a Jewish people. That core concept, I don't think is debatable, and I would say the vast majority of ultra-Orthodox Jews, when I say vast majority, I mean above 95% would agree to that declaration, that statement. There is a fringe, a small fringe, that are fiercely committed to the idea that building such a project is not possible until the Messianic era. And within that fringe, there is a fringe of the fringe who somehow think that the way to demonstrate that theological belief is to go and march with anti-Israel demonstrators. I mean, count the numbers. You simply need to go online and look at the news clips, and you can see the same 5, 10, 15 familiar faces. People that are demonstrating are not in any sense respected members of the community or representing in any way a legitimate mainstream voice in the Jewish community. They're not even representing a fringe viewpoint.
Okay, everyone, I am so thrilled to be joined once again by Dayan Eliezer Zobin, Rabbi Zobin, as I used to know him. And Dayan Zobin, you've been on the channel since basically the beginning, of over nearly a decade. And we've had so many fascinating conversations. The word Dayan, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a Hebrew word for judge, because Dayan Zobin is now a judge on the London Bet Din, a British Jewish court. He is one of the most sought after poskim, which is Hebrew for a Jewish legal scholar, inundated, I see it firsthand, with halachic questions. I'm one of those people that will often ask him questions, but not just on Jewish matters of Jewish law, but also life generally, philosophy, wisdom and in daily living and relationships. Dayan Zobin is an absolute powerhouse of Jewish wisdom and shares so many insights on Jewish values. He's involved in a lot of interfaith discussion and work as well there. And communally, he has his hands in a lot of different pies, from this being the senior rabbi at the Ner Yisrael community. He's the former principal of a leading Jewish college, Jewish school, high school, Emmanuel College. A lot of my friends went there. It's a terrific school. And personally, a rabbi to me. So I'm so thrilled to have you back on, Dayan Zobin, and I'm really looking forward to having regular conversations on a whole host of topics, because my list is very, very long, and I know that our audience will gain a lot from these discussions. So, bit of a long intro, but well worth it, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ollie. Thank you for those kind words, and always a treat to be with you and to sit with you, and looking forward to our conversation.
What I wanted to start by talking to you about is a topic that is front and center of this channel, front and center of Jewish people's minds, the world's mind for that matter. So much of the news is focused on what's been happening in Israel. It's been a very intense few years. And one of the things that it's forced people to grapple with, Jews, is their relationship with Zionism, the idea, the belief in the Jewish people's right to sovereignty in the land of Israel. And one of the things I'm often having to respond to is often it's anti-Israel commentators, often people who are on anti-Israel protests, but it sometimes will be, occasionally it could be Jews. It could be a very religious Jew or a very secular anti-Israel Jew that says Judaism and Zionism are not the same thing. You know, you can be Jewish without being a Zionist. And I'm often feel the need to push back on that, because if anyone actually opens the Torah, it is literally obsessive about Jews and the land of Israel. So my question to you is this a false distinction? Is this a false separation that's being created? And can you be a practicing Jew without being a Zionist?
So first of all, as you say, Ollie, it's been a very difficult few years and traumatic for all our communities in Israel and across the world, as you well know. I think that sometimes we get caught up in terminology and sort of load words with overly complex meanings. In essence, though, the core idea that the land of Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. It's where we are able to not just act as a faith and a religion, but express a national destiny, to be a people that can express the wonderful Jewish values of belief in God, of kindness, of generosity, of social responsibility, of giving, of justice, not just on an individual level, as we've been able to do for the last 2,000 years in the diaspora, not just on a communal level, as we've been able to do, but on a national level, to embody these values and hopefully be a Jewish country, a Jewish state, expressing these beautiful Torah values of Judaism. The idea that that should exist and is integral to Judaism, to Jewish identity, that we're able to form such a country, such a national state, and be a people in the fullest sense of the word, living in our homeland, speaking our language, I think everyone would agree that's integral to Jewish identity, absolutely integral to Jewish identity. Now, as I said, we sometimes confuse the word and load the word with more complexities. And of course, as Jews, we're always going to debate about how that manifests itself. How do we deal with creating a modern state? Are we ready to create that modern state? How do we deal with inhabitants that are already living there? Is there contradiction in our vision and our desire to build that homeland, to the right of the Palestinian community to form its own state and to have a two-state solution? How to resolve the dilemmas of living in the Middle East, which is a complicated and challenging part of the world? And how do we do that in a moral and ethical way and in a politically sensible way, in a way that's realistic? All of those, of course, are going to be raging debates in the Jewish world and beyond. And of course, there's legitimate room for discussion. But the core value that at the heart of Judaism, integral to Judaism, is a vision that we should and can and are entitled through our national homeland and our history and our connection that we've never broken and never ruptured, to have a home, a Jewish state in the Jewish land, in the land of Israel, where we can express ourselves as a Jewish people. I think that should be inarguable. I think that's absolutely, as you said, integral to Jewish identity and to Judaism.
Where do you think the misconception is rooted in? Because you hear a lot of people saying, Judaism is a religion, it's a set of beliefs, it's just the way you practice your religious life, and it's about rituals, but it's not, doesn't have any demands of nationalism or a nation state or anything like that. Whereas other people will say, no, that's ridiculous. It constantly talks about the nation of Israel and going to the promised land. But I just wondered, do you think that part of the misconception lies in the fact that Judaism is a bit of an outlier among the religions, in that it has this national component, this land component that other religions may not have?
It's a good question, and I think it's complicated, and the misconceptions come from a multi-tiered way. I think it's clear, as you correctly say, that in the text of the Torah, we are meant to be a nation. We're not just a religion. We have balanced in the diaspora being intensely, profoundly loyal citizens, patriotic citizens, with legal concepts like Dinah de Malchut Dinah, valuing and treasuring the law of the land, and with an intense sense of gratitude and appreciation for the cultures and the nations within which we live. But we have always also preserved aspects of national identity. Somehow, after we lost our physical presence in the land of Israel, we uploaded ourselves to the clouds. We became a virtual nation. And we preserved a platform of national existence, the Torah, and we preserved our language, we preserved our unique habits and culture and way of talking and expressing and looking and everything else that goes with a national identity. Now, it is true that we are a religion, we are faith, and we have a value system, but also we wish to preserve that connection amongst all of ourselves, no matter the degree to which people are or are not engaging with Jewish theological beliefs or practices. Everyone who is part of the Jewish family is part of that family and part of what we look towards building ourselves and continuing to build ourselves as the people of Israel. So I do think we have a national identity. I think that diaspora Jewry still can and should exist, and we can continue to, in a very successful way, balance that deep sense of connection to our countries of residence, and at the same time also insist on the right of the Jewish people, if we so choose and if we choose to move there, to have a Jewish homeland and to be able to rebuild and to continue to build that Jewish national state. Now, I think you mentioned both in the sense on the left and the right, confusion around this issue, and maybe we'll just spend a moment to talk about that. There are Jews who theologically believe that this attempt to build a homeland is most intimately connected to Messiah, to Mashiach, to the Messianic era, and perhaps would question the model of building such a homeland until then. But I want to stress that this is not political opposition to the project of Zionism. No one should be saying that we are less than any other ethnicity or group with a deep connection to the land of Israel and with the right to that land and the right to build a homeland there. That's absolutely at the heart of what it means to be Jewish. On the left, again, there has sometimes been an attempt to say we are merely a faith with our rituals, with our beliefs, but we're not just the rituals, we're not just for the synagogue. We believe Judaism is an intensely pragmatic and practical faith, which believes in changing the world and building institutions of family, a community, and sovereignty and nationhood. And I want to emphasize again that in my personal philosophy, and I believe integral to the mission of Zionism, in no way should this be heard as diminishing the rights of those who are non-Jews who are living there. Israel is, as it exists, is a profoundly democratic country with citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish, with Arab legislators in the Knesset, with Arab Palestinians who sit on the Supreme Court, who have been able to try and sentence senior political leaders and the president of the State of Israel. And if we are able to do so in a safe and secure and peaceful manner, absolutely to create a two-state solution in which the Palestinians who don't wish to be part of the Jewish project and the State of Israel are able to have their own state and live in security with their own national sense of identity. This isn't about a them or us. This isn't about a zero-sum game. But it is about the absolute foundation of any conversation should be that we are entitled and should be allowed to have a nation state as the French and the English and the Americans and the Russians do. And I think it's there that both on a political and on a profoundly religious level, any objection, I would say, is misunderstanding the nature of Judaism and ahistorical, untrue to the history of our connection to the State of Israel, to the land of Israel.
Absolutely. And I think there's some confusion about the ultra-Orthodox, as the term goes, Jews that are opposed to Zionism. Can you help us understand just the landscape a bit more? Because some people have this assumption, they'll see one or two people with black hats or dressed in black and white, and people from Neturei Carta saying, Judaism and Zionism are opposed, and people who aren't so informed will assume, therefore, ultra-Orthodox Judaism is against Zionism. Can you just help us understand what percentage of the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi world is opposed to Zionism, and what percentage, what is the relationship? Because I know it's broad, and just help us understand that whole dynamic a bit more.
So the vast majority of the ultra-Orthodox and Haredi world, in my understanding, is effectively Zionist and would agree with every word I said. The term is a loaded term and a complex term with historical baggage associated with it. And there are those who still see the term as carrying connotations of certain political philosophies and nationalism of the 1800s and 1900s, and see in the term a desire to secularize Judaism or to rebuild it and remodel it as solely a national identity rather than being a faith and religion. And that's where some find discomfort and are suspicious of the term. But if we're able to rise a little bit above semantics and just think about the core values I expressed, the idea that Judaism should absolutely continue to be expressed on a private level, a personal level, a communal level, but also ultimately we have the goal of expressing it on a national level. Whether that's possible to achieve in the fuller sense now or need to wait till a messianic era, that core concept I don't think is debatable. And I would say the vast majority of ultra-Orthodox Jews, when I say vast majority, I mean above 95% would agree to that declaration, that statement. Even if, as I said, to some the term carries with it connotations with which they're not comfortable. Now, there is a small fringe, that are fiercely committed to the idea that building such a project is not possible until the Messianic era. And within that fringe, there is a fringe of the fringe who somehow think that the way to demonstrate that theological belief is to go and march with anti-Israel demonstrators. And
or go and meet the president of Iran.
And go and meet the president of Iran. I mean, count the numbers. You simply need to go online and look at the news clips, and you can see the same 5, 10, 15 familiar faces. I don't think there's more than a couple of hundred Jews in the world out of, thank God, a population of 14 million who believe that this is the sensible and wise thing to do. Even if there are some theological divides within the Jewish community, and even if there are wholly legitimate divides about the current policies of the government of Israel and how it should or shouldn't deal with and I'm not voicing an opinion, very, very fraught and difficult issues, the idea of marching with demonstrators who are very often calling for the destruction of the state of Israel and sadly and tragically the death of Jews and the destruction of wonderful communities that have been built up there, the idea that this is an appropriate way to express political or theological views, I think is really a tiny fringe and less than 0.1% of the Jewish world or the ultra-Orthodox world. And to the best of my knowledge, the people that are demonstrating are not in any sense respected members of the community or representing in any way a legitimate mainstream voice in the Jewish community. Even mainstreamists, they're not even representing a fringe viewpoint within the Hasidic groupings, the Satmar groupings that have theological problems with aspects of the state of Israel. They're also not demonstrating and don't believe that it's right to be marching in this manner and meeting, the Yasser Arafats or the Ahmadinejads of the world.
Yeah, and this caricature that Zionism is this fiercely secular project that's assimilationist and all that. I understand that was something that created a lot of hesitancy originally among the religious Jewish world when Zionism was emerging. Do you think that part of that caricature that still exists and still is a little bit there in the religious world is becoming really dated and just doesn't reflect reality as it is now? And more than that, do you think people are starting to wake up to that in the religious world?
I think that there's a number of levels to this. I think that Israel is still grappling with profound existential issues. Of course, primarily how to survive, how to flourish, how to be safe and economically viable in a complex part of the world when it's constantly under attack, how to be a nation amongst the family of nations and continue to do so in a pragmatic but also ideologically holy way, a way that really has the values of Judaism and its profound sense of responsibility, mutual responsibility and care. And Israel, by the way, does this outstandingly in the forefront of aid and support of nations under distress and valuing and continuing to value human life, but how to maintain allegiance and truth and authenticity to its very, very strong democratic values. Anyone who knows and follows Israeli politics knows it's a fierce and vibrant democracy, and at the same time to be true to its Jewish identity, and how to balance what is a complicated identity. Jews argue and continue to argue about what it means to be Jewish, and how to manifest and express our Jewish identity, how to do so in a way which is profoundly true to our traditions and to halachic values, and at the same time profoundly respectful of the differences that ultimately are going to exist and continue to exist amongst Jews about what that looks like. So Israel is grappling with really profound existential questions, and included in those are questions that I can understand feel threatening to religious people. It is scary from religious points of view to contemplate a country which still has significant secular and political philosophies that can be in contrary to Torah values. And I don't think there's simple answers to these questions, but the idea that in essence Israel is proving to be a wonderful Jewish homeland has not proven to be a force for distancing from Jewish identity, but on the contrary has strengthened Jewish identity, has become a place of flourishing religious life, of Torah life, and of wonderful Jewish life manifesting in secular ways also. I think the idea that this is proving threatening to us despite the existential challenges that are being faced, I think has been proven false. And I would say on a pragmatic level, if we don't allow ourselves to get caught up in semantics, the vast majority of Israel's ultra-Orthodox population are very intensely involved in the apparatus of politics and state and governance and volunteering and national duty and civic duty. Despite some of the raging debates in Israel about army service and the like, they are very much identifying as citizens of Israel and engaged in Israel in a civic manner. And I think, therefore, thank God, we are seeing healing and closure in some of these areas of disagreement.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next follow-up question, which is, help us make sense of that. If you're saying that the majority of the ultra-Orthodox, I really don't like that term because it kind of makes them sound like they're just crazed, but whatever, let's just use the term, ultra-Orthodox world in Israel, the impression we get when seeing, these widespread protests against army service, and of course, that's a whole big debate, and I've made a video about that recently, and, we don't necessarily need to get into that, but they'll look at that and they'll think, this suggests they are fundamentally, if you don't want to defend this nation state on the battlefield, it suggests that they are in some ways quite fundamentally opposed to the project of Zionism. How can people make sense of this?
So I'm not going to attempt to justify or explain some of the more extreme actions of demonstrators. Israel has a culture of demonstration, hafganot, from every end of the political spectrum and in the middle. And certainly from the point of view of a diaspora Jew, it's not for me to criticize Israel's political process. But no, I don't like that style of demonstrating. Of course I don't. And I don't want in any way to justify it. I certainly don't want to justify non-army service or the like. What I do want to say is that if we listen to actually what's being said, the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox who are resisting army service are saying so because they believe that they are contributing to Israel and its flourishing and its success through their project of theological engagement, of Talmud Torah, and the religious lifestyle that they are living. And they believe...
So it's not opposition to Zionism when they're saying this.
Again, semantics are sometimes there, and there is discomfort in quarters around the use of the term Zionist. But the core idea that they wish the state of Israel to continue to exist and flourish and are engaging with its institutions, with its structures, with its political process is absolutely there. And when one listens to what they're saying, they believe that they are contributing to the fabric of Israeli society, to the success and flourishing of the state of Israel through their religious lifestyle and through their Talmud Torah, through their Torah learning. Now, again, we can argue around the theology and the pros and cons of such a belief and whether it's sustainable in the long run, economically and politically and so on, for the state of Israel and the justice of such a view. I'm not going to go down that path. But the core idea when one listens to what they're saying is that they feel a deep sense and a profound sense of national responsibility. The level of volunteering is significant. The level of engagement with the Chayalim, with the soldiers of Israel, and the support and the love and the embrace is there. And again, there is much hurt in Israeli society. There definitely is a feeling that parts of the ultra-Orthodox world don't understand what it is to have constant army duty and service and the suffering. There are calculations to be made about the economic viability about this, or adding up the numbers of the hours of volunteering. But when you look at the community, this is a community that definitely feels a profound sense of civic and social responsibility and achrayut, that beautiful word of bearing responsibility for their fellow citizens and for the success of Israel as a faith, as a religion, and as a nation state. There's no doubt that that's the case.
One of the critiques that I hear from people in the Muslim and Christian world that try to create this sharp distinction between Zionism and Judaism is they say, precisely as you mentioned earlier, look at the nature of Israeli society and Israeli governance. It's secular, it's progressive, from, I don't know, they'll point to all kinds of things in social policy and saying this doesn't look like what we would expect to, a Torah-believing, Bible-believing, conservative-leaning society to behave. Now, one of the things I was actually, someone said this to me. I had a conversation with this presenter on Blaze TV in America, and we had a bit of a discussion around this. And I said, actually, if you look at Israeli society on grassroots level, actually it's much more family-oriented, small c conservative than many Western countries. And yes, there's, life is complicated, especially after, and Jewish identity is complicated, especially after a 2,000-year exile, a lot of difficulty, and we haven't heard from God for 3,000 years. It's going to be messy. But actually, it's incredibly Jewish, and yeah, there are things that need changing and need improving, and I welcome that happening from the grassroots, and I think it is happening. But just wondered how you would respond if you were confronted with that point.
So I think there's a number of things to say, and the first thing that needs to be said is that I don't know if faiths and groups should be commenting on other faiths and groups and what their theology is and isn't. And I think part of the challenge around this, and indeed the claim that Zionism is or isn't part of Jewish identity, is I'm not sure any other ethnic or religious group needs to justify its beliefs and defend what is or isn't anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism in the same way as we're being called upon to do. But I think the magic of Israel is the degree to which, let's not forget, we're talking about in any other country emerging from its colonial past, in no sense and in no way would have achieved what Israel has achieved, in which Israel has become a member of the OECD, a first world country with a flourishing and vibrant economy and a profoundly successful happiness index amongst the top 5 in the world, and a flourishing, vibrant civic society. So I think sometimes outsiders look at the fierce discourse within Israel and see disunity and fragmentation. And I'm not saying the optics are good, but the degree to which, after disagreeing, we then all go home together and share a Shabbat meal is just, I think, to any outsider would be shocking. I remember a famous scene at the time of pre-October the 7th, when there were the disagreements around judicial reform, in which a demonstrator on one camp or the other, I can't remember which, there was two parallel demonstrators, and one demonstrator realised he had turned up without his flag, and he asked the demonstrator from the counter side, because both sides were waving Israeli flags, and he handed him his flag and borrowed it, and it's just amazing. I was there in Israel. I was lucky enough to be there in Israel at the time of those demonstrations. And again, I want to emphasize, I am a wimpish diaspora Jew. I do not join the demonstration. I do not like aspects of how civic discourse in Israel takes place, and I'm not trying to defend that. But I just remember the groups streaming toward each other, and there was not police present to separate the crowds, and there was not violence, and people were nodding and saying hello to each other, and sometimes meeting their brothers, their sisters, their cousins, and giving them a hug as they're walking to different ends of the demonstration. So I can't emphasize enough the degree to which there is civic unity, and despite the Sabra-like prickly exterior, a real warm, vibrant, rich inner heart that beats strongly in Israel. And I think that's the first point that needs to be said. The second point is, I do not think that Israel is this liberal, progressive, a-religious, secular society. I think the genius of Israel is its ability to be a profoundly liberal democracy, and with an incredibly vibrant culture of free speech, of a free press, and ability to give voice. Part of the PR problems Israel has at the moment is the degree to which everyone can express an opinion and a voice. It's a profoundly liberal democracy on the one hand, which gives space for expressions of values of all sorts, and including values against Jewish religion and against even Israel as a nation state on the one hand, and on the other hand, a very profound consensus of depth of pride in Jewish identity and our sense of mission and purpose. And you just need to go and walk in the streets of Israel if you're lucky enough to read Hebrew and see on the, in every building site here in the UK and in Israel, you have the name of the builders and the building project. And in Israel, those building projects on top of the sign have a phrase, B'siyata D'Shmaya. They say, with the help of God, here we're going to build a 30-story office block, a luxury hotel, a building residence for people that need social housing. It's there on the signs, it's there on the music that's played, in which there's a profound expression of a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, a sense of trust in God. The houses with mezuzot, with on the doorposts. I was at a conference recently around urban planning, and don't ask why, urban planning and Torah, and Jewish legal and philosophical aspects around some of the ethical dilemmas around urban planning and how you zone residences and how you build them in accordance. Very, very interesting matter. And the Minister of Housing was speaking, who's not a secular Jew. And someone at some point made a comment to him about a mezuzah. He said, well, of course I have a mezuzah up on the door. Of course I want my home to demonstrate its connection to God. And I think in the context of Israel, I almost don't know what the word secular means. And Israelis and the Israeli society has this profound ability to create a society in which there is a liberal democracy and a space for all views to be expressed, secular views, religious views, anti-religious views, anti-national views, and at the same time to have a very deep-seated sense of purpose and mission. And I think the flourishing of Israel... Almost incomparable. And the flourishing of Israel is demographic flourishing with, as you said, family values and with building homes. It's sense of, I think that the reason it can flourish is because all its citizens feel this deep sense of purpose. It's not just any old country. We're not just trying to live. It's a country in which we have a mission and a purpose to build something special. And the tragedy of what's going on is that we're talking about a profoundly ethical country that feels such a sense of social responsibility, not just to its own citizens, but to the citizens and people of the world, and the Jewish message of it feels and wants to be part of the company and companionship and family of nations. And yet so often that's sadly missed for reasons that we can discuss or not discuss as we wish. But Israel absolutely has a sense of Jewish mission and purpose. And I think anyone who says otherwise is simply missing and the currents, and not just undercurrents, not just grassroots, but even on the political level. You listen to the speeches that go on, the debate. I don't know if I can share a story about a recent visit I had to the Knesset and
Sure.
the debates around, I may have shared this actually on JTV in another setting, the debates around cruelty to animal and farming practices and the like. And all ends of the political spectrum were informed by Jewish values in debating animal rights and whipping out, books of Sheilot and Teshuvot, of halachic response to try and navigate the tricky parts of ethics of cruelty to animals and farming practice. This is embedded in Israeli culture, in medical ethics, in army ethics, in its political philosophy, and every level it is a profoundly Jewish and spiritual culture, and at the same time an amazingly liberal democracy.
And you visit Israel regularly, so have you noticed an increase in religious engagement, over recent years?
There definitely has been. There always was, but that some of the external challenges to that have been removed, and there's a very deep sense of spiritual seeking and a renewed sense of Jewish identity, no doubt about that.
And you mentioned that Jews across the spectrum, Israelis, they feel this sense of national purpose and mission and connected to that. Many people, especially in the West, are searching for that. They're in many ways envious of that and saying that we need to, as nations, rediscover that in a healthy way, in a way that doesn't go to extremes, but in a way that people feel this sense of we're all bound up by some shared identity, shared destiny that we want to be a part of. What do you think has created this this sense of shared purpose and wanting to contribute to it, and how can other nations and societies learn from it?
I think that actually one of the Jewish gifts to the world, and one that, please God, should continue to be a gift, and this applies to us as diaspora Jews equally, is that sense of community and togetherness and identity and purpose. People need a sense of tradition, they need a sense of belonging, they need a sense of family and of community and identity. I think one of the beautiful things about being a Jew is our community is a sense of connection to the past, to my ancestors, and I feel that many people in broader society lack a sense of rootedness, and that's very painful to see. And I hope as diaspora Jews we can model community building and a sense of identity. And I worry about a West that is losing that.
Just hang on for a moment. After covering Israel for years, I've realised that most of the lies boil down to one simple tactic used by Israel's enemies from the very start: the deliberate reversal of cause and effect. And our new documentary exposes exactly how this works. Have a watch of our trailer for our new film called The Great Reversal, and you can watch it in full right now by clicking the link below in the video description. For decades, one idea has shaped how much of the world understands the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel did something wrong, and the Palestinians simply resisted. Whether it's 1948 or the recent war in Gaza, the story is the same every time. Israel provokes, Palestinians resist. Israel oppresses, Palestinians fight back. This narrative dominates campuses, the media, and much of global politics. It feels familiar, it feels intuitive, and for many people, it feels true. But what if the sequence is backwards? What if the origin point and every major chapter that followed has been told in reverse? In the wars of 1948 and 67, in the collapse of Oslo, in the suicide bombings of the Intifada, in the rockets after Israel withdrew from Gaza, in the massacre of October 7th, and the global narrative that followed. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to expose the great lie that has reversed cause and effect, a narrative engineered to help the real aggressors erode Israel's legitimacy. We'll trace the conflict from its origins to the present day, revealing how at every stage the true sequence of events was inverted, how aggression was reframed as resistance, how defense was recast as provocation, and how a conflict rooted in hatred of Jews was deliberately twisted into a story that blames the Jews. Join us as we restore the story to the order in which it actually happened and uncover the truth hidden beneath a century of lies. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.
I think we sometimes confuse a sense, and it's understandable because of the history of the 20th century, but I think sometimes we confuse a sense of human equality to which we as Jews profoundly subscribe. The Talmud teaches us, why was humanity created from a single ancestor, from Adam and Eve, and it says that no human can turn to their fellow and say, my ancestor was greater than yours. This profound sense of shared humanity and common identity, and yet at the same time we don't see in that a contradiction to national identity, to family identity, to community. And sometimes we live in this world in which it's, we're either universal or exclusive, but actually we can and should have both. It's only when we are able to model from the bottom up, from our close personal relationships, who are unique and special to us, can we then go on and break out and build a broader sense of care. And I think someone who sees, God forbid, their parent and a stranger drowning and thinks there's some abstract philosophical dilemma as to who one ought to save, and is it biased or prejudiced to save one's parent first, is a profoundly unhealthy person in their moral sense and moral compass. It's only when we can love specifically that we can then broaden love in a meaningful way to genuinely talk about love of all. And again, I think that the West has retreated very fast from out of fear from any sense of patriotism, any sense of nationalism. It's almost become politically incorrect to express that sense of identity and purpose. I'm proud to say I'm profoundly patriotically British. I feel a deep sense of identity with it. When I read about the Battle of Hastings or the British Empire, I feel a sense of pride, despite the fact that my ancestors were living nowhere near Britain at the time, and with it there is Lithuanian or Russian Jews. But of course, one should be proud of one's culture and see the good within it, and recognise that it can also have flaws. In the same way as anyone we love, we recognise may not be a perfect human being, and yet we choose to see the good within them, and through so doing, and through that belief in the good within them, hopefully help them become better people themselves. And we need to see the good in our society, the good in our community, the good in our nation, our wonderful nation, with a brilliant history, not a perfect history. Which of us is perfect? But a nation here in the UK embodies values and a sense of, also actually a sense of mission, which we've often lost. And I hope that we can continue to contribute that. And I would say here, incidentally, along with our brothers and sisters in other faiths, in Islamic and Christian communities, I wish and I hope that those communities can continue to flourish as communities that give a sense of identity. And the decline of Christianity in the West worries me, that people don't have a church to turn to, that they don't have a community to turn to anymore. And that's scary. It's difficult to be a stable, healthy human without that.
Are there any specific practical policy prescriptions that you would encourage or recommend for Western nations to help rediscover this?
I'm not a political expert, and there are aspects of how Israel does things that also become fierce and difficult. I can only speak, and this is not a rabbinic message, I can only speak from the heart, and I can say that I think people often feel afraid to voice views and opinions and are shut down. I think we need to start with listening. We have a Talmudic tradition that we should let the smallest voice speak first. So the most junior voice speak first. It doesn't feel shut down by the more senior voices. We in the Talmudic history, it says that those who allow their opponent to speak first and who are the better listener to the opponent's argument are going to be the more successful in voicing their opinion and what they have to say. I think we need to allow people to share their existential anxieties around what it means to be British, around where our society and culture is going, and we need to create spaces in which these are legitimate views. And if we don't, these views will only be expressed by extremists, and that's scary and that's worrying. I think we shouldn't be in denial of fundamental human truths, in which it's okay to have community, to have family, to have nationhood and national identity, and not to feel that somehow destroys a sense of shared humanity. Most of us, I would say, are not political leaders and don't have influential voices in the higher in higher echelons of government. I think on a personal level, little practices in day-to-day life. You're filling up your car and there's someone else filling up the car on the other side of the petrol dispenser. Say hello to them. Say, how are you doing? Hello, sir. How are things? You pass someone in the street, nod and say good morning. I try and say good morning to every person I pass in the street. Just stop for a minute and speak to a person sitting homeless and begging on the street. Don't just give them that 50 pence coin or that pound, but say hello and ask them how they're doing. I think we can create a civil society again, a society which has care and has compassion and has a sense of shared identity. And I think often we can only do that through a grassroots level. I think if we, I'm sometimes suspicious of people that talk about big abstract values but aren't kind neighbours and friends and family members. I think if we can nod hello to 6 people and give them a smile, maybe they'll go home and smile a little more at their spouses or their children or their parents or their siblings or their friends. And I believe this can create a cascade, a trickle effect, which becomes a cascade of slightly better positivity and giving energy in the world.
I'm curious to pick up on a specific issue that is often discussed among those pushing back against an increase in patriotism and nationalism. You touched on it earlier, which is that so much of that is shaped from what happened in the 20th century, where you had very staunch nationalism leading to oppression of obviously Jews, minorities, and there's a great concern around that. And the Rabbi Sachs, in his book The Home We Build Together, he's basically saying, one second, well, if we go all the way to entire dilution of national culture and just have multiculturalism, then you end up turning society into a hotel rather than a home, and it leads to all the problems that we've discussed. I was just curious, from a Jewish standpoint, in an ideal Jewish state, let's say the Hebrew Republic, as it's called, of old, and perhaps ideally in the future, how would a Jewish a Torah state deal with, let's say, non-Jews living in their society? What are the requirements that they have for you to be a non-Jew living in the land of Israel? And how do we navigate that relationship between individual identity versus national identity in a way that's healthy for everyone?
So I think you're asking 2 questions, really. One is the understandable retreat of the West and some from nationalism and patriotism and some fear around this. And I think that's legitimate. I mean, as Jews, we have been victim, obviously, of nationalism gone crazy, gone mad, and the terrible consequences of that. But I think sometimes the pendulum swings too far. And actually, in allowing that to occur, because it's so profoundly untrue to how humans operate, I think actually that just risks a backlash to the opposite extreme. And I think we have to be more nuanced and mature as a society and be able to ask difficult questions and start national conversations in which there's a willingness to acknowledge mistakes made and areas of nationalism which can be flawed and dangerous, and at the same time have a pride in who and what we are. And I do think there's a sense of Britishness and British values that aren't just multicultural, that reflect unique aspects of our culture and heritage as a British people. And I think if we throw those away, we risk being homeless residents of this hotel that the great Rabbi Sachs described. In the Hebrew kingdom, the ancient kingdoms of Israel, of Judea, non-Jews were able to be citizens with citizenship and residency rights, as long as they subscribed to the Noahide commandments. And this is actually the halachic or legal background to the concept of Noahide law. Noahide law is simply a basic set of standards of humanity. And a non-Jew was not expected to be Jewish, to convert to Judaism, unless they so wished. And Noahide laws simply are basic things like not to murder, not to steal, to have a system of legal governance and courts, animal cruelty, not to rip limbs off living animals and consume them, and the like. So it's a very basic set of standards of basic humanity. There wasn't even a requirement of belief in the Jewish system. There was a objection to paganism because that could poison and create a toxic atmosphere within the Jewish state, and also paganism at the time was associated with profoundly immoral pagan practices. So paganism certainly, as in sense of idol worship, is included in the Noahide commands, but this is not a particularly onerous set of beliefs or requirements. And within that was, if you like, the constitution, the basic constitution of the country. And within that, non-Jews were absolutely able to be citizens and residents. And this is a recognized facet of legality, reflected in Talmudic law and reflected in the biblical stories of the times. And it's also clear that at times when the Jewish state prospered, particularly under the leadership of David and Solomon, of David and Shlomo, the Jewish state had good relations with its neighbors. There was a friendship between Lebanon and Israel, and shared projects in the building of the Holy Temple, the Beit HaMikdash, and others. Just open the books of Kings and see the descriptions in there. So I think we had then and we continue to have now the ability to balance a culture and a society and a national patriotism of tolerance, and at the same time a deep sense of pride and authenticity.
Did did these non-Jews, these practicing Noahides inside of Israel at the time, did they? In what sense did they need to be invested in Jewish national destiny? Was there any requirement at all, or is it entirely just about being non-offensive?
As long as they are resident and keeping basic shared expectations of humanity, avoiding murder, criminality, sexual immorality, idol worship, and the like, extreme animal cruelty and the like, that was sufficient. There was a Jewish national destiny and project, which anyone is welcome to join. That's the concept of conversion. Without that, one is choosing not to be part of the Jewish national faith religious project. But that was sufficient. They were entitled to be citizens of the land of Israel, residents of the land of Israel, without taking part in that national project.
Do you think there's any lesson that can be learned from this model that we can take today in terms of this whole issue of national identity versus making space for minorities?
I think it's difficult to apply simply. And let me answer that question both in the context, let's say, of the UK and then in the context of Israel. So, within the context of Israel, whether we like it or not, there are many Arab Palestinian citizens who do not want to be part of the state of Israel. And whilst we say, look, as a citizen of Israel, you have full democratic rights to vote, to engage in elections, to create your own political parties. Street signs in Arabic, again, just come and visit Israel and see what's going on there. And people can rise to the highest tier of the military, interestingly, Bedouin military leaders. People can rise to the highest tier of the political echelons and the judiciary system and the like. Nonetheless, the reality is, if you have someone who have a sense of shared national identity and doesn't want to be part of that, at some stage or other, we need to recognize that reality. And were we able to do so, by the way, I think there's a consensus in Israel that were we able to do so securely, we would wish to have a two-state solution, which Palestinian citizens are able to have their own sense of national identity. Maybe as an aside, I'll mention that Israel has committed itself in previous attempts at peace deals, from Oslo, from various other ones, to create in which there was a majority of Israel's population that believes in such a solution. And the only reason Israel has moved away from these projects are because of a disbelief of any ability to do so in a secure way. But security aside, Israel wishes to have its own national identity and respect the national identity of others, whether we would wish it to be so or not. So I think the first thing is you do need in a sense of common identity. You need citizens who are willing and wish to be part of that nation state. I don't know much about the situation of the Noahides living in Israel at the time, but presumably they wished and were happy to be part of that nation state. And if they wouldn't, then it's inconceivable. If you have someone working against the essence of your values and work profoundly lobbying or fighting against it, I think it's impossible to build a nation or a culture at the time. So I do think
tell that to the West.
yeah. And therefore, I do think we need a certain set of common values and an agreement of as a minimum, not behaving in an objectionable manner to what we could call the Constitution of the West. And if there are figures within the UK or elsewhere who are profoundly objecting to some of the bedrocks of Western values and Western society, then we have a problem. But part of Western values is a multiculturalism and a space for people to manifest and express themselves through different ethnic and cultural practices, and that should continue to flourish. I don't think that needs to contradict a profound sense of national identity. And I would say some of the most overt political voices in the UK and the USA and other Western nations at the moment are children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or even immigrants or immigrants themselves, who do not see a contradiction to a profound loyalty to their own faith or to their own cultural traditions and to being a British citizen. Thank God here in the UK, we proudly have had UK prime ministers that came Disraeli from Jewish tradition, Rishi Sunak from his Hindu tradition, and so on. And we should be very proud of that, and please God continue to have that flourish. I think identity is complicated, and we can exist on multiple levels. You know, we can be a proud Londoner, as I am, a proud Jew, as I am, a proud Brit, as I am, and I don't think there needs to be a contradiction between these sense of identities.
Just lastly, on going back to the term Zionism, something I've wondered about is: do you think one could make the case that actually the term is not helpful anymore, because it creates this false distinction. At the end of the day, this is just Jews living in their land, as they have done for thousands of years. And most Jews living there, and Jews that support Israel around the world, aren't thinking, about Zionism in any philosophical sense. It's just Jews being Jews.
I think, like all labels and terms, we're stuck with where it is. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And yes, it does carry some confusion and some baggage, but it's a pretty good term. It ultimately means the right for Jews to have a country like everyone else has their own country, and for us to create, as we are, a flourishing society in Zion, in the land of Israel. So I agree with you. I don't think it's in hindsight, many terms perhaps aren't the best, but that's where we are, and it's a pretty good term.
Before we wrap up, I want to share something important with you. The entire anti-Israel movement is built on one central accusation: that in 1948, Israel stole the land, and ever since, Palestinians have simply been resisting. But what if everything we've been told about this story is untrue? What if the real history of 1948 shows not Arabs being forced out, but Jews, while seeking peace, having to fight for their survival against a genocidal enemy that willed its destruction long before Israel's re-establishment? Have a watch of the trailer for our new, groundbreaking and essential documentary entitled What Really Happened in 1948. And if you want to see the full film, just click the link in the video description. In 1948, the world witnessed the rebirth of the Jewish state, the State of Israel. A moment celebrated as a miracle of survival and self-determination after centuries of persecution and the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet for decades, this event has been twisted into a narrative of theft and catastrophe, with the so-called Nakba portrayed as Israel's original sin, where Jews allegedly stole Arab land and displaced innocents in a premeditated act of ethnic cleansing. But what if this story is fundamentally inverted? What if the cause and effect are the other way around? Not Israel aggressively seizing territory and Arabs responding in self-defense, but Arabs, driven by deep-seated hatred, rejecting the Jews' legal and historical rights to live in their ancestral homeland and waging a genocidal war long before Israel's re-establishment. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to uncover the unvarnished truth about 1948, the centuries of pogroms and anti-Semitic violence that set the stage, the Arab leaders' explicit calls for extermination, and the defensive war Israel fought to secure its existence. We'll challenge the pervasive lies head-on, showing how Arab rejection of peace wasn't about creating a Palestinian state, but about denying Jews the right to live at all. From the Nazi-allied leader of the Arabs in Palestine, the Mufti al-Husseini, to the forgotten occupations by Jordan and Egypt, when no Palestinian state was even considered, this is the story of a conflict rooted not in displacement, but in whether the Jews deserve to live in their homeland. Join us as we debunk the myths with facts, confront the historical record fairly but firmly, and reveal why 1948 was not an act of aggression, but a righteous response to annihilation. This is what really happened in 1948. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.